This meeting is for 1 hour and 15 minutes. David W. will be sharing on steps 8 and 9 for 50 minutes. David, thank you for your service and your willingness to share your life with us today. We love and appreciate you. At this time, please help me give a warm welcome to David from Los Angeles, California. His home group is the Fledgling Society. Welcome, David.
Wow, thank you for that. My name is Dave, and I'm a person with alcoholism and a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Thank you so much for that warm welcome. You got me. I'm going to remove my spotlight because I look at myself enough. Let's go. Alcoholics Anonymous, the legacy that started with the first 100 men and women and goes back before to the power of God that is anonymous. Wow. I'm excited to share on steps. I get a chance to talk sometimes in AA, and there's different formats, and I always love focused meetings. I brought my big book. Hopefully some of you got yours. I'm going to read a few things tonight. The way that I like to roll is, I'm just going to see what happens when I come on the page and see what comes out of it. I'm planning to share some of my own personal stories with Making Amends, some of which are from the early days, 2006, 2007, 2008, when I got really busy and did a couple of rounds of step work. And I've continued to commence this path and make amends with people since that time. And I have some points of view on these things, and I have some experience. And that's what I'm here to share. But I do honor the literature. It is sort of my lane. It's the thing that really, really resonates with me. And it's not so much that I want to be didactic and overly worship the words. It's just that it gave me a platform by which I could connect to people. And so I've been using the book to connect to people for many years. It gives us a reason to get together every Wednesday night to read the pages and just kind of be on the same page, right? But we all can have different points of view. And the one thing I do want to say, and thank you, Tamara, so much for the invite and for the love, is that having gone through the book so many times, my perspectives do evolve, right? Like the things that I underlined at 1 year sober are not the things that I share about at 16. And so it's important to just embrace the evolution of mindset. The literature stays the same, but I change and I evolve. And so hopefully I can bring some of my current experiences to the energy here tonight. And yes, we started the meeting with the end of the share, like how great life can get when you walk this path, right? So thank you for that warm welcome. Let's see. I can say that I am an alcoholic that has been to the gates of insanity and death. I have been to multiple treatment centers. I've gone through hospital detoxes, correctional facilities. In 2004-05, I ended up at a nonprofit treatment center in 2006, and I got excited about this message. In early recovery, I wasn't 100% sold on the ideas contained in this book. I knew I wanted to be sober. And then at some point, I knew I wanted to be sober and I wanted to do AA. And then I knew I wanted to be sober and do AA and work the 12 steps. And then at some point, I heard a speaker that was talking about using the book. And I knew I wanted to be sober in AA, do the 12 steps, and to honor the literature. So that's why I'm here tonight. Okay. I'm going to start on page 76 and I'm going to read a few things and see where it takes me. I'm on the third paragraph on page 76. It says, now we need more action, without which we find that faith without works is dead. And that came from Bill's story, this idea of putting in work, this prayerful life, this faith without action doesn't do much for me. So it says we have a list of persons we have harmed and whom we're willing to make amends. We made it when we took inventory. So I think the 8 steps pretty straightforward for me. I do inventory 3 kinds. I do a resentment, a fear, and a sex inventory. And I'm not one of these people that believes it has to be the most exhaustive and conclusive thing of all time. I believe an inventory should be a current snapshot of what's going on in my life. My first inventory was pretty extensive and it was very, very difficult. But I've always had the belief of it's better to do something and do some step work and then do it again and keep going rather than assume that it has to be this perfect piece of work. I see people with these three 3-round binder notebooks with 482 resentments and trying to make it perfect and make sure everything. And I'm sort of like, no, let's just do some step work and then do some more step work. You get it? That's a little bit of my approach. So my first inventory, it wasn't complete, but it was a beginning. I swallowed and digested some chunks of truth about myself, and I made a good beginning. And after I did that first round of amends, I did another one. And then I saw some more because my mind wasn't able to see the whole thing. Yeah. I'm only able to see what I'm able to see in early recovery because I'm biased. My thinking is skewed. I'm filtering the lens of the world through my own experience, which is very limited. So when I made that first round of amends, it gave me some insight. I became armed with facts about myself properly and was able to take additional looks. Okay. So I've been doing inventory at least once a year for my entire recovery. Many times I'll do 2 or 3. I wrote a single resentment out the other day just because it was persistent for a few days, and it turned into a bunch of fears. And I read it to my wife. And then I called my sponsor the next day and I told him that I did inventory and I read it to my wife. Boom, just like that. So that's how this way of life can become very practical. Yeah, it's pretty strenuous in the beginning. I'm trying to figure it out and do the inventory perfectly and get to these meetings and call these people. But at some point, this becomes a design for living. It works in rough going and it works in smooth going. So I had a first inventory and I was told that I could use that as my first list and just pull names. And then I was told to do a little second mini inventory. We called it a drastic self-appraisal, and that's what it says on 76. Third paragraph, 6th line down, it says, we subjected ourselves to a drastic self-appraisal, which means that anything that wasn't on my inventories, I spent some time with. And I started playing with some prayers. I was taught in Alcoholics Anonymous, I can be the author of my own prayers, right? In the 3rd step, it says, the wording is optional so long as I express the idea. In the 7th step, it says, when ready, we say something like this. So I started using my own prayerful energy and my own prayerful intention. I remember praying, God, please reveal to me amends that I'm not able to see, things that I've overlooked, maybe swept under the rug strategically, right? Things that I've pretended don't exist or haven't become aware of. So yeah, drastic self-appraisal is a big deal for me. I oftentimes will go back through my life chronologically to think about like periods and try to see where there might have been some rupture. And I like the word rupture a lot. The next sentence says, now we go out to our fellows and repair the damage done in the past. We attempt to sweep away the debris which has accumulated out of our effort to live on self-will and run the show ourselves. So I think there's a lot of assumptions that if in order to do like amends and to clean stuff up with people, there has to be really clear harm. I've had people consult with me and they're like, I'm not sure what the harm is. And sometimes, it's really important to identify the harm and be very explicit about what the harm was and be able to offer a game plan for healing work and for follow-up. But sometimes it's just a little bit of debris that's built up. It's just a little unresolved energy. There isn't like this one big event, this one big harm, but there's just something that has gone awry in the relational dynamic. And I've had a lot of amends that were, just an effort to sweep away debris that accumulated out of my own ways of being, right? My 3rd step stuff, always trying to run the show. If we haven't the will to do this, we ask until it comes. And I like this part of step 8 because a lot of the times in the book, it says we ask God, and those are prayers. So whenever it says we ask or we ask God, I put an asterisk in my margin because it's telling me that I'm going to do something, right? So in chapter 5, it says we asked for his protection and care with complete abandon. My sponsor didn't just read that with me. He said, I want you to go home and ask for his protection and care with complete abandon. So I interpret those as instructions. And in the A step, it says we don't just ask, we ask until it comes. So that might mean a lot of asking, right? Remember, it was agreed at the beginning we would go to any lengths for victory over alcohol. And I just want to play with that word victory for a second. Yeah. We talk a lot about, powerlessness and, our difficulties, but, we also talk about conquering, overcoming, and getting victory around here. And I'm just going to read something from Bill's story on page 14. This is the 2nd full paragraph. He says, these were revolutionary and drastic proposals, but the moment I fully accepted them, the effect was electric. There was a sense of victory, followed by such a peace and serenity as I had never known. There was utter confidence. I felt lifted up. So those are the kind of things that I was told to underline in my book, not just look for the problem statements, but to see where, the hope is offered, right? So words like victory always caught my attention. I'm going to go to the bottom of page 76. I'm sure some of my own personal stories are going to come to life. But it says on the last 3 lines, to some people, we need not and probably should not emphasize the spiritual feature on our first approach. When I got sober in 2006, I was truly intoxicated with recovery. And it was all I thought about and all I talked about. And I didn't even really have regular conversations with people. I didn't know like world issues, sports. I was just like super into recovery. And that's what I needed for a person like me who goes to great lengths to get loaded. I learned how to go to great lengths to stay sober and stay active here. And so, yeah, it was obvious when I went to make my first round of amends what I was up to. People were like pretty clear that I was a different person, right? Like my energy was extremely different. People knew that I was in AA. And I could be certainly myself, but not everyone's into that. Not everyone's a big fan. Not everyone is super impressed by the fact that I found God and I'm on a spiritual path. And so it's really obvious to me that, there are times when I just have to approach people like human beings, right? Use everyday language. And that comes again in the 12th step is like how to approach people, how to use everyday language so that you can actually get through. Because all it takes is someone like me who caused a lot of harm to now be on this sort of spiritual high horse to just really turn someone off. Right. And so I learned how to be myself with my language and with my energy. But I also learned at other times I needed to reel it in and just, be very matter of fact and very direct with people. I do think that on the top of 77, we have some very important language. It says at the moment, we're trying to put our lives in order. And that's important because you hear this kind of conversation a lot. Like, is the amends, is it for me? Is it for them? I've had a few amends where the person was like, oh, let me guess. You're just going to come here and just hash up all this old stuff so that you can feel better. Right. And that's a common sort of defense. And I've been very strategic in my years of how to use language and let someone know that I'm very intentional about my language and I'm not here to bring up old stuff. I'm here to talk about the right now and in the future, because we know a lot more about trauma than we did when this book was written. We know that, recalling certain experiences and events can be very, very difficult for some people. So in the workshop, we sometimes talk about trauma-informed AA, right? Where you're going to be mindful and have to set up these conversations in a way to where someone is actually willing to let their nervous system go there if there is something that was extremely difficult for someone. But yeah, this idea of this is important for me because this is something that I need to do so that I can fit myself to be of service. There was once a time when I had a friend that I grew up with, and he ended up doing a lot of drugs and had a psychiatric breakdown and has been institutionalized ever since. And his parents blamed me because I was a drug using friend. And it wasn't clear to me in the first few years of my step work that I needed to do anything over there. I didn't really understand the dynamics that were at play. But you know how I knew that I needed to do something? I must have been 3 years sober. It was because I grew up in the same neighborhood as him. And it would be when I was going down the street, I realized that I didn't want to go down that street. You get it? There was something in my nervous system that was like, no, that's not safe. Don't go that way because you might bump into someone. And that's how I knew. It didn't come up from an inventory. It wasn't like, oh, I caused, like I have a fear. It was truly me being in the realm of the spirit, navigating the world and having my nervous system feel, there's an aversion. There's something there. And then I was able to come home and think about it. I was like, there's unresolved energy, right? And it was a difficult approach to make. And I was pretty aggressive about it. And, I had to really ask them for their time. And they were definitely hesitant, and they hesitated at the last minute. And I found it really important, and I showed up anyways. And it was tearful energy. It was difficult for them to see me doing so well when their son was in a hospital. But we had some really mending energy, and I made a commitment to them that day that I would always be there in their son's life. And so I take his calls regularly and we chat and I check in with them. And I just believe that having 9-step conversations that are very brief and end right there can be a source of harm, and that there needs to be some kind of long-term follow-up. If I'm just going to show up and just like throw things that were traumatic in people's face and then leave and never have any sort of follow-up, that can actually be more damaging than mending. And now it's not true that in all approaches, there's things that need to happen afterwards. But in this case, it was obvious, right? Like we're friends on Facebook with the mom and she raised money for a mental health thing and I make a donation, right? Like I treat the 9-step as an ongoing thing rather than an initial conversation where someone gets their name crossed off a list or you throw the card somewhere. I really try to think about this as a demonstration, right? And that's the word that's in this paragraph. So yes, there is a part of this, which is me trying to do this to put my life in order, right? But it's not just about me and my life. I'm on the third line of 77. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. You sometimes hear people confusing the word purpose with the traditions, primary purpose to stay sober, right? So as a person, my primary purpose is not just to stay sober. That's the group's primary purpose, to help other alcoholics stay sober, right? As an individual, right, that learns principles, that integrates with the rest of planet Earth, that practices principles in my home's occupations and affairs. My real purpose is to fit myself to be of maximum service to God and the people about us, which means bigger than just AA. People that I've harmed, people in the workplace, right? And that was one of the major, transitions that I had around 3 years sober. It was just about like, I'm an alcoholic, therefore my purpose is to help alcoholics. And then you realize like, no, with this God energy and this awakened spirit, like we can bring helpful energy to other places as well. Wow, right? And that's what the amends really set me up for, is how can I be helpful in general, right? And I like to leave amends like open-doored. A lot of times people are looking to have conversations and then close the door. Like I said, I like to leave doors open and say things like, if there's anything I could ever do to be helpful to you, like, please keep me on your radar. Like I'm here for you. And it doesn't just mean me saying that. In many cases, I'll check on someone, call them once a year after that, just to see, I made amends to some other friends' parents and I let them know, right? Like when that person's ready, I'll be there. And you better believe when that person was ready, I was there, right, to write inventory. I'm going to go to the bottom of 77, the carryover paragraph, 4 lines up from the bottom. It says, our man is sure to be impressed with the sincere desire to set right the wrong. He's going to be more interested in a demonstration of goodwill than in our talk of spiritual discovery. So I'm a big believer in the word demonstration. It's in the book a few times. Basically what it says is like, prove it. We learn how to talk good around here, especially if you go to a lot of meetings. You learn the AA banter, you learn the slang, and you do some step work, and you learn how to say things like I'm self-seeking, or I've been afraid, I've been running my life on fear. But really what this part of the book is talking about is the actual demonstration, the goodwill. And in some cases, it's better to demonstrate the goodwill before you even do the talking. Yeah. Sometimes we got to lead with the talking, make the direct approach, and then follow up with the actions. And there are other times when the best thing to do is to start with the actions before, especially if there's a long legacy of, dysfunction. I think in my workshop that I'm a part of, we try to get people through the steps pretty quickly, but it takes several months. There are times when doing this stuff sooner than later is the way to go. And there are other times when it's good to get a little bit of demonstration in before you make the direct amends, right? Especially to family members, et cetera. And, we're going to get there. The way I interpret the instructions in the book is that it's broken down into 5 sections that describe ways to make approaches. And maybe I'll have a story for each of them. Okay. The first section is enemies. And it really pretty much, says the man we hated, right? So 4 lines down, first full paragraph on 77, it says the question of how to approach the man we hated will arise. So this is when, if there's a certain approach that has to do with someone that I quote unquote hate, I might look for the instructions that are in here. Okay. And there was a few times when I wasn't sure what maybe I had done to someone, what the harm was, or why I even hated them. But I knew that there was unresolved energy and that it was uncomfortable. And there's some instructions here that I really like. And this is at the bottom of that first full paragraph, 77. We go to him in a helpful and forgiving spirit, confessing our formal ill feeling and expressing our regret. I've used that a lot. Okay. So in other words, you're not going to someone to tell them how much you dislike them. I'll go to someone and tell them, I've been harboring some really weird energy based on, I don't even know what, but it's self and it's disgusting. And I'm ready to move past it. And I was hoping that we could have a healing session and start our relationship on a new basis. And people respond well to that, right? I had a drug and alcohol counselor who was super helpful to me. And then he was in AA, and then we just had weird energy because there's the AA energy and then there's the treatment industry energy. And then he wasn't really in AA and I was, and I judged him. And then one day I realized like this person that really, really helped me, I was like harboring ill feeling toward. It's like, how does that even happen? Right. And I remember needing to sit down with this person and just confessing that I had gotten a little bit intoxicated with AA thinking. I got to be honest with y'all. I've made a lot of amends for being on AA high horses, hilltops, we call it. Yeah. Treating newcomers disrespectfully because I'm empowered with the big book. I remember there was a friend of mine. He had just got back from a relapse, and we were at a meeting and he was a few days sober. And I was like, how are you doing? He's like, I'm doing great. And I was like, you're doing great. In my mind, you just lost your time. And the only thing that matters is your AA status and your time. And I was degrading to him with my AA intoxicating energy. And I remember making amends to him that night. I called him at 11 o'clock when I did a nightly review. And these are the kind of things that I've learned from doing a lot of this work is that we catch things quickly so that they don't build up. Yeah. I've definitely made amends to meetings where I was, very aggressive in speaking. I used to be very, very active in AA to the point where I had inventories that was like, I'm resentful at this sponsee, I'm resentful at this meeting and this group. And then one day I realized I was like, yo, you need to get past all this stuff and then start being a more mending, kind of healing member of AA. The enemies section can be super, super helpful. The bottom of 77 says, under no condition do we criticize such a person or argue. Simply, we tell them that we'll never get over drinking until we have done our utmost to straighten out the past. I've never said that to someone directly, but the spirit of that is like, this is really, really important to me. So I believe that, there's the amends and then there's the setting up the appointment. And this is something that I like to offer people help with. If you're going to craft a text or an email or some sort of message, the language that we use can make or break their appointment. If you do it and you set it up in the text message or the email, it sounds like it's self and it's about you and you're there to they might not want to talk to you, right? But when I'm very intentional about, I might say something like, I've done a lot of reflections in recent years and I've seen some stuff about myself that I don't love, some stuff that was really uncomfortable. And I saw some stuff related to you and us, and I want to own it and claim it. If you give me a few minutes of your time, I promise you, it will be in the spirit of mending and healing, and I will be very intentional about my words. And people are more curious about that rather than, thinking, what is this person going to, say or do? You're kind of like giving them a sneak preview, right? Say, this is really important to me. Give me the time and the place, and I'll be there. And I used to think everything had to happen in person, but after the pandemic and all the Zoom stuff, we've seen people make a round of amends over Zoom and still have a spiritual awakening. And you can do stuff over the phone. If you can get to someone in the same room and be in the same energy, absolutely go for it. But we see people getting well through technology. On page 78, there's some really important instructions. Second line down from the top, it says, his faults are not discussed. We stick to our own. And this is the major spiritual exercise of AA, is looking at my stuff. That's the hard part. being a self-centered person and learning how to be other-centered and see things from a broader perspective, to be considerate of the welfare of other people, and to be able to stick to my own stuff and not add in the buts and the becauses and the explanations. That's a very difficult thing for someone who spent my life fighting and defending, right? And so I learned how to do that in inventory. And if my manner is calm, frank, and open, we'll be gratified with the result. That's the hard part. A lot of us, I'll speak for me, I've had a lot of, trauma from crime and being incarcerated. And it's hard to like really live in that calm nervous system place, right? But with prayer, sobriety, prayer, meditation, I was able to go into these amends in that place, right? And there's a prayer on page 79 that I use before going into a lot of these amends, and I'll get there in just a minute. On page 78, it says, our former enemies will sometimes praise what we are doing and wish us well. Occasionally, they'll offer assistance. There was an apartment complex where I was raided. The police raided my apartment in the middle of the night, and it was an illegal raid, but who cares? Those details aren't important, right? Point is like I caused a lot of harm in the building, and I was going to leave, and my manager wasn't in town, and I was difficult getting out of there, and I really wanted to clean that up, and I had a hard time getting a hold of this person. In other words, like I did the famous leave a message, I did the famous show up, no response, and I checked in with people in AA, and I left another one. And someone told me, it was like, oh, if you gave it 3 shots, then you're good. And I was like, you know what? It didn't sit right with me. And I gave it a number 4, and on number 4, he picked up the phone. You get it? My intuition guided me, not the instructions. I wasn't looking for the way out of it. I was looking for the way into it. I really, really wanted to do it. And I told him about my journey, and he knew about the 12-step fellowships and the altruistic movements. And he was very, very pleased to hear what I had to say, even though he was resistant to talking to me in the first place. In other words, the spiritual work that I had done made my words readily accessible. And then a few years later, when I was filling out like an application to another apartment, someone actually called this guy to check on my references. And he said, that's a fine young man, and you should let him live with you. And I just want to say that this was a miracle, because someone who witnessed my drug use and alcohol abuse and criminal activity spoke highly of me. And don't do amends with the hope for that, okay? We do them for our own spiritual progress. A lot of times we do things because we hope something will turn out a certain way. I had no expectations of anything, but this person, because of the way I handled it, offered to help me. He offered some assistance, and it was very, very moving. The next section that I study in the amends process is money, and this is on page 78. It says most alcoholics owe money. And this is just one paragraph. I certainly owed a lot of money, and I had a lot of money owed to me. And one of the biggest things I did with my own spiritual journey was I let everyone who owed me money off the hook, because I did some illegal stuff, right? And I was like in treatment and early recovery, so resentful at all the people that never paid me back. And all my energy was like going to collect money. And I paid back money that was that I owed, and I let a lot of people, I just let it go. And it was one of the most freeing things I ever done, because I come from like the streets, and I had some ways of thinking like you can't ever let it be known that someone didn't pay you back. That's a sign of weakness. And I got sober with $80,000 worth of debt. One of my cases was a civil lawsuit that was attached to a felony DUI with great bodily harm and a hit and run. So I was involved in a car accident where I hurt someone. And I owed money through the criminal justice system. It was illegal. It was a lien. It was a civil case. And if I didn't make the payments, I would have a lien on my assets. So I got sober with incredibly challenging financial situations. And I had to make payments over the first 8 years of my sobriety to pay back someone that I hurt. It wasn't even necessarily paying back, but I owed money. They got a pretty aggressive case. They got a pretty big win. But needless to say, it was what I needed. God knew what I needed. I was reckless with money out there, and I learned that I could save money. I could be responsible with money. So the deal that was arranged was a deal through the courts, right? I had to pay off a certain amount each year. And I'll just tell one quick story there. I learned how to save. I learned how to work. I learned how to be frugal. I learned how to be tight with money so that I could pay off the money that I owed. And at 8 years sober, I did put the last check in the mail. It took me 8 years to get back to $0, y'all. Okay. I just want you to know I got back to zero at 8 years sober. And it turned out that the woman who was victimized by this car accident, she had a stress fracture in her cheek. She worked as a secretary for a law firm. You get it? The same law firm that sued me. Y'all got the gist. I contacted her because you guys told me that like the money's cool, paying back the money's cool, but it's not enough. And I was able to track her down, and she said that she was waiting for me. She said that she knew that I was on a spiritual path and that I was in recovery, and that she was a God-loving woman, and she was waiting for this day when I came to see her. And we melted and we talked about God. And I remember being able to lie on the floor that day and feeling like my sobriety could begin now. I was back to zero. I could start. So a lot of people get sober with a lot of wreckage, and I just want to let you know that, one grain of sand at a time, one little dust in the wind at a time, we can move mountains around here. And I got back to $0 at 8 years sober. And it was super, super important. But if one thing I'll say about money is that it isn't about necessarily being able to pay back everything right away. It's about being able to arrange a deal. That's what it says. It says arranging the best deal we can. So if the best you can do is $20 a month or pounds, whatever you got, just arrange the deal so that you're in the game. You get it? It's like, it's not about having it or not having it. It's about being invested in the recovery process. And this deal, for me was pretty aggressive. I had annual payments, but the deal happened, and, I lost my fear of the creditors, and I was able to emerge triumphant. The third category is called crime. It says, perhaps we've committed a criminal offense. I'm on page 78 on the third paragraph down. I certainly have a lot of this in my story. Another thing that's worth saying is my tendency when I did my first inventory was to look at stuff that I did while drinking. It was like my drinking led to this and this, and my drinking, yada, yada. And what I ended up doing, I think on my second inventory, my third inventory, was like going back to my childhood. Yeah, I was like, I was a bully in the third grade to someone. That matters. I stole from my first employer. Like I worked at a sports camp, and I was like, I sold t-shirts, and I put a couple 20s one day. And I remember like I went back and cleaned up that stuff too. And these were some of the most profound amends that I made. I remember like, the feeling of like going back to someone who thought highly of me and like, telling them that I did something and showing up with the money. I remember he told me, he was like, meet me at 7 a.m. I was like, just tell me where to be and I'll be there. And he was like, he wanted an early thing far away. And I was so willing to do it. And I remember sitting in the car and like my heart was pounding. I was like, it was such a small deal to go pay back $40 from, 1990. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was like, but for some reason, my first step told me that I was going to be thorough with these steps. And I said the prayer. On page 79 in the first full paragraph. It says, reminding ourselves that we decided to go to any lengths to find a spiritual experience, we ask that we be given strength and direction to do the right thing, no matter what the personal consequences may be. And this is a prayer that's in the big book, that's in the context of crime, right? And I was able to, pay that person back. And he told me I was light years ahead of the game, and it was well received. And guess what? We've stayed in touch. I think staying in touch with people we make amends with is so important, because you just never know how the energy is going to flow, right? And how things can be different, right? I had an amends conversation with an ex-girlfriend who I terrorized, with my drinking and my using and putting that before her. And I had a couple just erratic moments in that relationship where I'm sure she felt unsafe. And I remember the best we could do was a phone conversation because she had moved on and she had, gotten married, and just wasn't appropriate to like get together face to face. And she gave me phone time, and that was the move. And I just remember telling her, I didn't know where the words came from, but they really came from, reading this book. And it was heartfelt. And, we didn't get into all the infidelity. We didn't get into all the details. It wasn't important. But what was important was that she knew that she had a lifetime pass with me. And that was the words that came out of my mouth. I just want you to know that you have a lifetime pass with me, which meant that didn't matter when, no matter what happened, there was ever a time that I could be of service. Please, you have a lifetime pass. And it must have been a few years later that her younger brother was struggling with drugs and alcohol, and she called me, and I was able to offer the family some advice. So I'm a big fan of keeping these doors open, checking on people, following up on the amends. I think too many people shortchange it and just do a quick conversation, cross them off the list, and then move on. I think it's important to keep those doors open because you just never know when there can be some more long-term follow-up. The next part of the book describes, except when to do so would injure them or others. There's some really clear instructions in here about how to not involve other people. So we get a case study, right? It says, usually, however, other people are involved. And so this is a case where, someone had done something, dirty. He had remarried. He didn't pay alimony. And once he commenced our way of life, we thought he ought to be willing to go to the judge and say, here I am. But that wouldn't be helpful because doing that wouldn't actually provide solution, which is sending money, right? And so I just want to emphasize what it says on the bottom of page 79, 5 lines up. He says he did, right? So he wrote his first wife admitting his faults and also sent a small amount of money. And so I just want to really emphasize that's the demonstration. The letters, the words are great, but if you owe money, that's the thing, right? And he didn't have a lot of money, but he sent a small amount of money, right? Just to show that we're in the mend, we're in the game. And this is the big line that I really want to emphasize. He told her what he would try to do in the future. So I think a lot of times in the amends process, people do this spiel and say this is the harm that I caused. This is the way I see it. Is there anything I can do to make it right? Right. And I think that that's great. But I think before I open it up to them, I always try to propose a game plan. This is what I think I can do to set right the wrong. And then I open it up to them. So my sort of formula for amends is I let someone know that I have a newfound clarity. I see things differently than I once did. So that's letting someone know that I've engaged in a spiritual process and I'm able to see some things that I wasn't able to see before. And this is what I see. These are ways in which I believe I may have been harmful. These are things that I think I can do to set right the wrong, whether that be directly with them or in general. Okay. There's been a few amends where I've told people, I said straight up, I've had some behaviors that are just really gross. And I'm not convinced that I'll be able to change them until I own up to them with some people. And you're one of those people. Do you mind if I own my shit so that I can grow spiritually? And they're like, okay, they can appreciate it. You see what I'm saying? I'm like, I need to grow. And if I don't engage in a process where I deflate myself, I don't have a chance. Right. And then people are like, okay. And then I own my things. And then and I'm able to grow. And then so I tell them what I would like to do. And then I open it up and say, what did I miss? I had a few amends where I thought my inventory was so good. And I had these aha moments in the 5th column and I thought I saw the truth. And then I brought that to someone and they were like, yeah, that didn't bother me at all. What really bothered me was when you did this, right? And it was something that I totally missed, right? And that's why, the inventory is incomplete without the amends. I think I see the truth because I read it to someone, but I'm still limited by my own thinking. It's not till I go have these conversations that I'm able to really become properly armed with facts about myself. So I like to do the work ahead of time, let someone know that I've done some work. I've thought about these things. This is how I see it. This is what I want to do. What am I missing? What do you see? How can I set right the wrong? And people engage with that really well. And I try to be very confident and have some sort of a demonstration. On the top of page 80, it says, before taking drastic action, which might implicate other people, we secure their consent. These are important instructions, right? So I can't just pull people into stuff. I have to check in. So there was a time when I went to go see friends of mine's parents, because I terrorized when I was out there. Okay, like I'm talking about handguns. I had one of those stories, right? And I didn't just go to his parents. I checked in with him first, okay? Make sure it was clear. Am I good? Can we go do this, right? Secure people's consent. And then, we must not shrink. And we get a little bit of a case study. Someone who, did something dirty to a rival, made him look bad, felt guilty, consulted with his wife and his partner to make sure everyone was good. He felt like he had to do it. He didn't want to stand before his creator guilty. He knew he would start drinking again, and his action met widespread approval, right? So he took the risk and he listened to God. There's a part in chapter 7 where it says, follow the dictates of a higher power. You'll presently live in a new and wonderful world, no matter what your present circumstances. At some point, the journey becomes about me trusting the intuition, the signals that I get from God, not just the instructions from a sponsor, right? But like the actual dictates of a higher power, right? And some of those really start to come in the 9th step. The 4th section is called domestic. It says bottom of 80. The chances are we have domestic troubles. And it talks about stuff that we learn about in the chapter to wives, right? Someone becoming uncommunicative, resentful, perhaps having an exciting affair with the girl who understands. And I certainly had one of those. On page 81, the first full paragraph, this first sentence is critical. It says, whatever the situation, we usually have to do something about it. So there are situations when you can't do the thing that's obvious, but it says that we have to do something about it, right? And it's not clear always what that is. Do we tell people? What kind of details do we give? We can't involve other people, but there's something that we can do. And then I'm going to go to the 8th line down. It says, we are sorry for what we have done, and God willing, it should not be repeated. So that's the amend. It's not the conversation that I had about it. It's the me not repeating it. That's the actual long-term demonstration and the follow-up. So I tell people, if you're not ready to change the behavior, maybe you shouldn't make the amend. Conversely, sometimes if you're not ready to change the behavior, but you make the approach, you have the conversation, and it's heavy, it can make you ready to change the behavior, right? So they're both true. I do think that when we have heartfelt conversations with people and they dig deep into our spirit and change me, it positions me to be ready to make changes that I might not have been able to make on my own. And that's why these direct amends are so, so important. Our design for living is not a one-way street. I'm on page 82 now. I'm going to go to the last section, which is family. So just to recap, I broke it down into 5 sections. The first is enemies, page 77, money, page 78, crime, page 78, and then domestic, bottom of 80. And then the 5th section here is family, right? It says, if we have no such complication, there's plenty we should do at home. This is the 2nd full paragraph on page 82. And you hear this conversation a lot about living amends. Like, what does that mean? And some people use that term. I was told pretty early on that, like, with respect to certain things, like there's no such thing as just living, and you got to do something, right? But there's ways that we can interpret the living amends. Okay. So if it's just to keep sober, it says sometimes we hear an alcoholic say the only thing he needs to do is keep sober, right? That's the sort of shortcut that in my home group we don't necessarily approve of. It says certainly he must keep sober, for there will be no home if he doesn't, but he is yet a long way from making good to the wife or parents whom for years he is so shockingly treated. So I got sober when I was 2006. And yeah, I was just a baby boy, just a little kid. My parents were still thriving and all. They raised me twice. They had to raise me again in my 20s. But I was able to make some really powerful amends with them. Took me probably like 7-8 months to feel grounded enough to do it and do the necessary step work. When I came to see my mom, she was like, I've been waiting for you. Huh. You're talking about going to all these meetings and stuff. Like, where's mine? You know, my mom, I come from a genetic legacy of alcoholism. My mother's father was an active member of AA, and there's a lot of alcoholism on my mom's side of the family, and chronic disease and early death. And, you know, my mom is only in her early 70s now, and she has dementia. It's just common cognitive decline process on her side of the family. And, you know, she knows that I'm the one that'll be that's there for her. You know, I can't spend the amount of hours that I would like to with caretaking. But you better believe I bought a home 4 blocks from where they live. I bought a home on the same street that I grew up on. So I'm nearby. I'm in my neighborhood, so I can show up for my family. And they knew that I would be the ones to take care of them when they got old. You know how they knew? Because I told them when I made direct amends, and they felt it. And that's the long-term demonstration that I encourage people to engage in. You know, my parents went through the ringer with me, and I was able to tell them, listen, when you guys are old, I got you. And that's been the case. It's amazing. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I'm the greatest son of all time. Okay. Like I'm a workaholic and I got my own family, but like I'm around, you know what I'm saying? I'm around. And, we feel a man is unthinking when he says sobriety is enough, right? So there's got to be more than just sobriety. And what we're talking about is a long period of reconstruction ahead. And reconstruction, that's a good thing. By the way, if you have what I have, if you're like an alcoholic of my type that has anxiety and a trauma history, I don't like long periods of anything. I like things that happen quickly and fast, right? And this idea of like there's a long period of reconstruction sounds a little bit difficult, but that's what I signed up for. And guess what? It says we must take the lead. In other words, when I make an amend with someone, and if I have a healing conversation, it's not on them to follow up. It's on me. I take the lead, right? A remorseful mumbling that we are sorry won't fill the bill at all. We have to sit down with the family and frankly analyze the past as we now see it. There's my language, as we now see it. You get it? The newfound clarity. That's like one of my favorite ways to start an amends. I see things differently than I used to. Like I didn't used to see it this way because I was in self. And now I'm on a path and I see it differently. And here's how I see it. And people respond really well to that. You're basically saying that I was unable to see things. And this is the truth as I now see it. This is what I see to be true. Tell me what's true for you, right? And then boom, the healing energy starts. Their defects may be glaring, but the chances are that our own actions are partly responsible. So we clean house with the family, asking each morning in meditation. This is a prayer that our Creator show us the way of patience, tolerance, kindliness, and love. And I really use that prayer before walking into a lot of amends. The other prayer on page 79 is more in the context of crime. But for me, this praying for patience, tolerance, kindliness, and love, it's instructed in the morning, but you can use that before going into an amend. A difficult conversation, use that prayer. Powerful. The spiritual life is not a theory. We have to live it. Unless one's family expresses a desire to live upon spiritual principles, we think we ought not to urge them. We should not talk incessantly to them about spiritual matters. And these are lessons that I've had to learn, right? Come back to planet Earth, right? Where we use everyday language, they will change in time. And I'm just going to go ahead and say that this next sentence is probably the real spirit of steps 8 and 9 that I think is worth capturing. It says our behavior will convince them more than our words. Sometimes the words is just step 8. The words is just the willingness, right? The actual amend is the behavior, the long-term follow-up. And it may take a long time for people to be convinced. I'm going to read something from Page 127, the family afterward. And I got really like annoyed when big book people were talking about how they always finished with their amends. They're so finished. You're just finished with your amends. I was like, well, on page 127, first full paragraph, it says the head of the house ought to remember that he is mainly to blame for what befell his home. He can scarcely square the account in his lifetime, meaning that the long-term demonstration might have to go on for quite a while longer than I would like, right? We must remember that 10 or 20 years of drunkenness would make a skeptic out of anyone. And there may be some things that we can never fully write. We don't worry about them if we can honestly say to ourselves that we would write them if we could. When people can't be found, we can do letters, we can do spiritual activities, graveside amends. There's lots of options, right? It says, whatever the situation, we usually have to do something. What matters is that you do stuff and that you believe in what you're doing. All the details, like the details of the way you do inventory, whether or not you make a list or make cards, none of that matters. What matters is that you believe in what you're doing and you give it your full effort. That's what matters in the realm of the spirit. And yeah, there's always angles, there's always approaches. And if there's not, there's always sitting and being patient and letting the universe take care of stuff and reveal stuff to you. Sometimes I didn't get revealed things until I was 5 or 7, or I made a big amend like 4 years ago, something I totally missed. And I showed up to a high school 20-year reunion with $800 in an envelope from a drug deal gone bad in the early 2000s. How about that? You know what I'm saying? And it was just like the best thing ever. You know what I mean? And it was just like hugs. It was just intuition, just being guided, being shown what to do and how to be able to walk the earth a free person and not have unresolved energy. I don't feel like when I'm going to go to the grocery store, drive down the street, there's someone that I'm ducking and dodging. I feel free. I feel free because I've done some spiritual work around here. I'm open to the possibility that there's stuff I've missed. I'm open to the possibility that more will be revealed. But, you know, thus we grow. As God's people, we stand on our feet. We don't crawl before anyone. If we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we'll be amazed before we are halfway through. We're going to know a new freedom, not the old freedom, not the old happiness, a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. My past is pretty tumultuous. I'm a multiple convicted felon. You know, yeah, been through institutions and, you know, I'm in a world now where it's like, you know, there are, you know, a lot of people that would try to hide that. And sometimes it's not appropriate to share that, but there are other times when I don't hide it. And it feels pretty freeing to not worried that you're going to find out. And, you know, I'm in a pretty large professional world. You know, I went through and got a PhD since I've been sober, you know, from one of the best universities in the world. I've done research on early life trauma, mental health, eating disorders. I've been rubbing some elbows with some pretty big names, and I get to be me. I don't have to fake the front. I'm proud of who I am because I did the work in the 12 steps. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we'll see how our experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We'll lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. I see the clock just resetting. So I'm going to, I see what you're doing over there. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. It doesn't say that economic insecurity will leave us. It says that fear of economic insecurity will leave us. And people misconstrue that promise a lot, right? We'll intuitively know. That's the key. Recovery is about freedom and gaining access to intuition, being able to know stuff, having a deep knowing, okay? And that's what this process allows me to do, intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. I still check in with wise counsel. I still get input from people. I like to run things by people. Sometimes I run them by them after. You know what I'm saying? As opposed to like run them, get approval, and then, no, just do the thing and then run it by someone later. That's how I roll. we'll suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They're being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize if we work for them. Thank you.
David, thank you so much. That was awesome.